Now that we have looked at the important factors to consider when sharing ideas, and delved into the way that you can use visuals to create a meaningful idea sharing experience, what we'll do in this video is analyze and deconstruct a specific example from my own experience. We're going to look at a trip that I made to my high school alma mater to share my post-high school journey that led me ultimately to creating this classroom. Let's get into it. Before getting into the visual component of this particular idea sharing experience, let me first describe those 4 key components that we've been looking at in this module: the audience, the context, the idea, and the impact. The audience, as you already know, is a group of high school students, specifically those students that produce the school newspaper and yearbook. The context is the high school publications classroom, where they produce those two things. It is the instructor of that class, Mr. Meinzen, that invited me to chat with them. I myself was on the newspaper staff in high school and have kept in touch with that particular teacher. Note that the context of a high school classroom with 20 students or so is much different than a high school auditorium with the entire school. If I were speaking to the latter group, I would have approached the whole experience from a much different perspective. The idea that I was there to share was the path that I have taken since high school. My former teacher, Mr. Meinzen, had seen how I had made my way into this relatively non-traditional doodle-based career, and he wanted his students to know that such careers exist. The desired impact, therefore, was an expanded view of career options, as well as a sense of how to go about pursuing those more non-traditional careers in the connected world of the internet. Now, before breaking down the visual format of the presentation that I gave, I want to share an abbreviated version of it so that you have a better sense of what those students experienced the day I came to chat with them. So here, more or less, is how it all went down. So, before I delved into my own journey since high school, I wanted to start by getting to know the students in the classroom a little bit. So I asked, in a circle, we went around and asked people to share their name, what they like to do in their free time, and then also a memorable newspaper story or yearbook page that they themselves had created. That was a fun way to get things started and get to know the students that were there in the classroom. After they shared, I also added my own responses. My name, of course, being Doug, what I like to do in my free time being hiking and exploring the outdoors. And the story that I wrote in high school was about the 2 soccer coaches at our high school here, both of whom were from Scotland and had played either semi-professional or professional soccer in Europe before coming to the US and starting to coach. The goal of this conversation with the students there, as I've mentioned, was to describe the path that I had taken since I graduated high school in 2004 to then, which was 2014, largely because many of the students were about to start that path, and all of them were no more than a few years away from exploring what happens after high school. So I started to tell my own story, and starting with my junior year of high school when I took a trip to Washington, D.C., which kind of broadened my perspective and made me want to read more about the world. Specifically, I was interested in science and read Cosmos by Carl Sagan, which got me interested in physics, which ultimately, after graduating from high school in 2004 and for the first time asking this question, okay, what comes next? I decided to go to Willamette University, which is up in Salem, Oregon, to study physics, and also got very interested in Spanish within my first few years there at Willamette. And my junior year of college was able to spend an entire year studying abroad in Ecuador, which was an amazing experience, but also led to a little bit of a difficult decision upon graduating college. Again, asking that question, okay, what do I do next? Do I pursue physics, which I'm still interested in, or do I pursue Spanish, which I ended up doing a double major in each of those, or do I do something else entirely? What I went with was physics, and moved from Oregon across the country to Boston and attended Northeastern University. and was part of a PhD physics program there, which entailed schoolwork, obviously, learning about physics, and included some teaching as well, being a graduate student teacher, and also doing some hands-on research. I enjoyed the research a lot. That was a lot of fun. Doing practical, real things in the lab was very cool. I also enjoyed the teaching part, as you might imagine. The school part didn't resonate with me very well. I didn't particularly like the way we were going about studying physics. For me, it was too much of a quick, broad overview and not enough kind of delving into taking the time to really understand some of these deeper concepts and connections in the realm of physics, which was part of the reason I enjoyed the subject in the first place. So that disconnect for school in particular led me to move on from that program, realizing after a year that wasn't the right fit for me. So I had to again ask the question, what next? And about that same time, I had gotten my first ever iPod Touch and was somewhat mesmerized by the ability to make things happen on a screen by touching it and moving it. That was a very cool experience. And I decided I wanted to try making apps. So that's what I did. I had enough of a computer programming background via some of the physics instruction and working with some of the equipment and experiments involves interacting with the computer and writing some computer programming. So I had enough of a background to kind of delve into that on my own, and I ended up making 4 iPhone apps that I was very proud of, all in the category of nerdy math puzzle games, which I was pretty proud of myself for creating the thing that I envisioned and that I set out to create. But as far as an income generator, I made a total of $57 within the 2 or 3 months that these were out there. So kind of realized that wasn't particularly a feasible career path right away, that it was a quote unquote failure in some ways and a success in others. But again, I had to ask that question, what comes next? I realized that I had liked the teaching component, and that had been kind of a common theme throughout my life, even in high school and college, where I had done some tutoring along the way during those years. So I decided to attend Pacific University back in Oregon, went to grad school to get my Master of Arts in Teaching. So some of the things involved in becoming a teacher: learning a lot about education theory, curriculum design, putting together an educational experience. There's also a daily grind component of being a teacher within a structured system. So I enjoyed the education theory part quite a bit. I also enjoyed curriculum design, designing educational experiences. But based on how I named the last piece, wasn't too happy about the daily grind, and noticed that very quickly within the education system that I was involved in here in Oregon, the resulted in my case in a large lack of sleep, not getting enough exercise, quite a bit of stress. I wasn't eating very healthy, and I wasn't getting enough social time. So there was a lack of balance there in my life that I was finding after getting that degree and kind of jumping into the world of a full-time and part-time teacher. So what I kind of recognized there was, for me at least, there's this comfort zone, right? Then there's this region outside the comfort zone where I think meaningful growth occurs. But outside of that second boundary is the danger zone. And for me, it felt like teaching was just outside of not only outside of my comfort zone, but outside of that space where meaningful growth can occur. So again, I had to ask that question, what do I do next? It was right about this time when I came across Sunny Brown's TED Talk, which is where this stuff starts happening. Her talk, Doodlers Unite, combining words and visuals together, and how that really lights up the brain. And it was this cool combination of something a bit somewhat artsy, which I had never been involved in, but was kind of intrigued with and wanted to pursue, but also nerdy, which is more in line with the things that I'd been up to previously. So for me, that was kind of the perfect combo to pursue. So I was like, yes, I want to explore that. Let's see where that goes. To do that exploring, I started a blog and shared my progress as I was learning how to do this sketchnoting and doodling and visualizing of ideas. And it was at that point, after I'd been, putting these sketch notes, writing a little bit of article to go along with it, when I realized there was kind of a connection between what I was doing on this blog and what I had done in high school, being on the Billy Bulletin staff. That's the name of the high school newspaper. That as part of that newspaper staff, that was the first time when I had kind of written something intended for other people that was published and that went out and that other people read, even in the Billy Bulletin case, just within the local and high school community. But now I was kind of expanding that and doing that via the blog and sharing it with the world, which was kind of a cool parallel to make, particularly talking to students there within that publications classroom. That website was thegraphicrecorder.com, where I would listen to podcasts and watch videos and go to live events and sketchnote them and share those sketch notes and what I was learning, both the material that I was learning from those different learning experiences, but also how I was going about developing the skill of sketchnoting, visual note taking. And at first my sketches were very clunky. Here's the very first sketch note that I ever shared on thegraphicrecorder.com. I forget which program I was using, but I was doing this on my computer with a tablet. So I was doing some drawing, but it also had the ability to type in some text. So you see that combo there. But over time, those sketches started to get better. My skills improved slowly as I experimented with different materials, different styles, and eventually, because I was putting my work out there, and slowly people started making it to that blog, that website, The Graphic Recorder, where I was sharing these sketches, people started to request that I sketchnote something of theirs, and they offered to pay me for it, which was a cool transition into the thinking that, wait a minute, maybe I can make some sort of a career out of this. And I also started doing video illustrations. This right here is a photo of the very first video illustration that I ever did. It was for a TEDx event in Portland, doing these kind of fun intro slides. And it's kind of weird to look back on that because now this is what I do for a living, essentially. I make these videos each week that you guys are seeing. You're in the middle of one right now. That's kind of cool. And at the time I was working on a book. The first iteration of the title was the Sketchnote Skill Builder, but this is what turned into the Verbal to Visual Notebook, which you might be familiar with. And it really was at this point, and particularly at this time when I was having the conversation with these high school students, that I was just starting to make that connection back to teaching. I had spent all this time exploring visual note-taking, sketchnoting on my own. I was starting to think about, okay, I've always liked teaching. Let's see if I can apply my background in education to this world of visual thinking. At the time, verbal to visual didn't exist yet, but that was the very first step that then a little bit later led to verbal to visual and led to this classroom. So what I realized there, that combine a creative pursuit with something that you're passionate about that also helps other people, that there's the opportunity to make a career out of that, which was a fun message to share with those high school students that would soon probably already were thinking about a career or what that might look like. So the 3 pieces of advice that I ended the conversation with was, 1, be sure to follow a path that intrigues you, not one that you feel obligated to take. And that if you can, share your stuff along the way. Find an avenue to share what you're learning, because there are a lot of potential benefits that come from that. And look for ways to help others, no matter what you're doing and what creative pursuit you are going after. And then I ended up with a way for people to stay in touch if they were interested. So that there is a quick, hopefully not too rushed version of the chat that I had. There was some interaction along the way. You got the talking only version of it, the me talking only version of it. That was it. That was the chat that I had with the publications class at Pleasant Hill High School back in the spring of 2014. Now that you've got a feel for what the experience was like for those students that day, let's get back to deconstructing the presentation. Specifically, let's look at the presentation format. As you saw, I went with a square-ish image size, only slightly longer than it was tall. I wanted a simple, non-white background color, so I went with beige, and used black for both images and text, in addition to a little bit of gray when I needed to overlay one image on top of another. The slides were fully sketched, with a few photos added in here and there. To get those sketched images, I used an ultra fine point Sharpie on paper, which I then scanned in and digitized to create the slides, which are really just individual image files that I cycled through. And as you just saw, I used those slides as a visual anchor to the verbal narrative that I was telling. The nice thing about a visual presentation like this is that there's no need to memorize anything because the visuals can prompt you for what to say next. And because of the flexibility and small scale of being in an individual classroom, I was able to answer student questions along the way, and I always had those visuals to keep my place within the narrative that I was sharing. Having that breakdown of the visual presentation in place, I'd like to now highlight what I felt went well about this idea sharing experience and what didn't go well. I felt pretty good about the fact that I was able to use the sketched format of the slides to demonstrate what visual thinking is all about. That in and of itself was a useful thing to show these students that had probably gotten used to boring PowerPoint slides. I also felt good about the engagement I had with those students throughout the class period. It seemed that opening it up to them initially with those first questions led to more of a back and forth throughout, as opposed to just a one-way conversation. With that said, I think I could have been more intentional about bringing home the desired impact. Overall, I think I was a little too focused on my own story and didn't give students enough time for connecting how my story might relate to theirs. If I were to visit another high school classroom with the same goal in mind, I would either have made sure to leave some room at the end to hear from students about what things they're interested in exploring post-high school, or maybe even provide a physical takeaway with open-ended prompts and some fun sketches so that they can take what they heard and explore how they might apply that to their future plans. And now I will end this video in the way that I wish I had ended that classroom chat, with some ideas to ponder and apply to your own life. After the last lesson, I asked you to reflect on an idea sharing experience that had a significant impact on your life. I want you to take those observations and combine them with what you saw in this video to pull out the most important ideas that you would like to apply to your own idea sharing experiences moving forward. Use the resources below to help you do that, and then check out the next lesson.